This is the horror of American politics today. Not that Richard Nixon and his fixers have been crippled, convicted, indicted, disgraced, or even jailed, but that the only available alternatives are not much better. The same dim collection of burned out hacks who have been fouling our air with their gibberish for the last 20 years. How long, oh Lord, how long? And how much longer will we have to wait before some high-powered shark with a fistful of answers will finally bring us face to face with the ugly question that is already so close to the surface in this country that sooner or later even politicians will have to cope with it? Is the democracy worth all the risks and problems that necessarily go with it? Or would we all be happier by admitting that the whole thing was a lark from the start, and now that it hasn't worked out, to hell with it? That milkman who made me his bagman was no fool. I took my orders from him, and it never occurred to me to wonder where his came from. It was enough for me to cruise those elm-lined streets in a big, bright-colored van and deliver the goods. But I was 10 years old then, and I didn't know much, or at least not as much as I know now. But every once in a while, on humorless nights like these, I think about how sharp and sure I felt when I was sprinting across those manicured lawns, jumping the finely trimmed hedges, and hitting the board of that slow-cruising truck. If the milkman had given me a pistol and told me to put a bullet in the stomach of any slob who haggled about the bill, I would probably have done that too, because the milkman was my boss and my benefactor. He drove the truck, and as far as I was concerned, he might as well have been the Pope or the President. On a need-to-know basis, the milkman understood that I was not among the needy, nor was he, for that matter. We were both a lot happier just doing what we were told. George Orwell had a phrase for it. Neither he nor Aldous Huxley had much faith in the future of participatory democracy. Orwell even set a date. 1984. And the most disturbing revelation that emerged from last year's Watergate hearings was not so much the arrogance and criminality of Nixon's henchmen, but the aggressively totalitarian character of his whole administration. It is ugly to know just how close we came to meeting Orwell's deadline. Meanwhile, it is tempting to dismiss the ominous fact that Richard Nixon is still the president. The specter of impeachment leads more and more weight to the probability of his resignation. If I were a gambling person, which I am, whenever possible, I would bet that Nixon will resign for reasons of health within the next 6 months. It will be a nasty gig when it happens, a maudlin spectacle in prime time on all 4 TV networks. He will kick out the jams in a desperate bid for martyrdom, and then he will fly off forever to a life of brooding isolation, perhaps on one of Robert Abplanalp's, what the fuck kind of name is that? Private islands in the Bahamas. There will be an all-night poker games on the Palm Screen patio with other wealthy exiles like Howard Hughes and Robert Vesco, and occasionally Baby Rebozo. And Nixon, the doomed exile, will spend the daylight hours dictating his memoirs in a permanent state of high fever and vengefulness to his faithful secretary and companion, Rosemary Woods. The only other residents on the island will be Secret Service guards assigned on a 6-month rotation basis by acting President Gerald Ford. That is one scenario, and the odds would seem to favor it. But there are quite a few others, all based on the grim possibility that Richard Nixon might have no intention at all of resigning. He just may have already sketched out a last-ditch D-Day-style battle plan that would turn the tide with one stroke and scuttle any movement for impeachment. Which brings us back to the question of nuclear war. or at least a quick nuclear zap against China, with the full and formal support of our old ally, Russia. There is a fiendish simplicity in this plan, a Hitler-esque logic so awful that I would not even think about printing it unless I were absolutely certain that Nixon was at least a year ahead of me in the plan and all its details. Even now, I suspect he spends the last half hour of each day keeping it constantly up to date on one of his yellow legal pads. So here it is, the final solution to almost all our problems. A long-term treaty with Russia, arranged by Henry Kissinger, securing Moscow's support of an American invasion, seizure, and terminal occupation of all oil-producing countries in the Middle East. This would not only solve the energy crisis, in quotes, and end unemployment immediately by pressing all idle and able-bodied males into service for the invasion occupation forces, which is exactly what it is. But it would also crank up the economy to a wartime level and give the federal government unlimited emergency powers. In exchange for Russian support, this is number 2, for our violent seizure of all Middle East oil reserves, the United States would agree to support the USSR in a preemptive nuclear strike against targets in China, destroying at least 90% of that nation's industrial capacity and reducing the population to a state of chaos, panic, and famine for the next 100 years. This would end the Kremlin's worries about China, guarantee peace in Indochina for the foreseeable future, and ensure a strong and friendly ally in Japan as kingpin of the East. These are merely the highlights of the final solution. No doubt there are other and uglier aspects, but my time and space are too limited. This is unbelievable. But my time and space are too limited for any long screeds on the subject. The only real question is whether Mr. Nixon is mad enough to run the risk of paralyzing both the Congress and the people by resorting to such drastic measures. There is no doubt at all in his mind that he is capable of it, but it will not be quite as easy for him now as it would have been last year. 6 months ago, I was getting a daily rush out of watching the nightmare unfold. There was a warm sense of poetic justice in seeing fate drive these money changers out of the temple they had worked so hard to steal from its rightful owners. The word paranoia was no longer mentioned except as a joke or by yahoos in serious conversations about national politics. The truth was turning out to be even worse than my most paranoid ravings during that painful 1972 election. But that high is beginning to fade, tailing down a vague sense of angst. Whatever happens to Richard Nixon when the wolves finally rip down his door seems almost besides the point now. He has been down in his bunker for so long that even his friends will feel nervous if he tries to re-emerge. All we can really ask of him at this point is a semblance of self-restraint until some way can be found to get rid of him gracefully. This is not a cheerful prospect for Mr. Nixon or anyone else, but it would be a hell of a lot easier to cope with if we could pick up a glimmer of light at the end of this foul tunnel of a year that only mad dogs and milkmen can claim to have survived without serious brain damage. Or maybe it's just me. It is 10 below zero outside, and the snow hasn't stopped for days. The sun has apparently been sucked into orbit behind the comet Kohoutek. Is this really a new year? Are we bottoming out? Or are we into the age of the new fear? New York Times, January 1st, 1974. All hail Thompson forever.